Recently, I was asked by somebody, what do I think about value investing? And I gave my answer, and then it made me think more deeply. Do we have actually, is there knowledge in investing? Is there like an accumulated knowledge base that we can draw from? Is there something like a theory of investing that helps us navigate the financial markets, or are we just kind of like navigating in real time, trying to adjust to problems, and then in hindsight coming up with things that we call theory, which are really not very useful? Or in plain English, are we in a situation, let's say like the science world or the art world, where we have very good hindsight theory, so we can always explain going backwards why things happen, but we can't predict what's going to happen next? Or is this more like an engineering practice where we do have a lot of knowledge, where we can, shoot a rocket up to Mars and have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen? So where do we stand? I want to talk about this. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's November 20th, 2021. This is Krim Delco. Since the last update, we're up 4.5%. The market's down 15 basis points. For the year, we're up 48.9%. The market's up 22.8%. We're outperforming by 26.1%. So is there a theory of investing? Is there something that we can hold on to that we call a theory of investing that helps us predict what's going to happen in future endeavors while we are investing? So this question is pretty loaded already. And after having read a lot of David Deutsch, listened to Brad Hall and all that, I think I have to be very careful here. First, when I say, is there a theory? And then I say, well, can we predict? I'm already assuming that a theory's purpose is to make predictions. And I think after Deutsch and others, Sean Carroll, I would say, is also in that camp. It's not so straightforward. You can't just say a theory is only good if you can predict things. A theory can be useful for many things. So then the question is, of course, okay, what do I even mean with theory of investing, and what's the question? And I think, let me ask the question this way. Let's be more practical. Instead of making an epistemological podcast here where I go back to the roots and sort of probably going to end up somewhere in the Bible or somewhere like that. Let's just talk about the following. We have concepts, in investing. We have value investing, growth investing, we have valuations. There's a lot of stuff that people go and learn there's even courses in investing, university courses. So what is all that? Is that useful? The answer is no. It's not useful if your purpose is to generate wealth. It's completely useless. The theory of value investing is not useful when you're in the business of generating wealth. It's useful for other things. It's a very good tool for, let's say, doing the job according to the guild that is chosen to do the job. So I'm very much in favor of Paul Feyerabend when it comes to all these things, and I know he's considered an anarchist. I have just a little anecdote. I was actually lucky enough to listen to some of his last lectures that he gave in Zurich, I think before he retired and died. So I back then wasn't really sure what I'm listening to be honest. I thought this is a little bit of a weird guy talking about kind of anything goes kind of stuff. And I was just starting my undergrad career in Zurich, and I really was a little bit taken aback, because in those days I thought that what you learn at university, that's truth, and that's really what's up. And he's kind of saying, listen, don't listen to us here. We're just telling you stories that other people believe in, and that sort of the guild of academics believes in. And if you know how to talk like us, you will be successful in life, but there's no truth behind it. So this is really scary. But anyway, what he said is more or less that science, the way it's done, with its processes and all, and it's the so-called scientific process, and all these things are simply just kind of skills that you acquire to be accepted by the guild of scientists. And occasionally they succeed, occasionally they develop stuff that's useful, but overall the scientific process and the theory of science and all these things are relatively useless when it comes to understanding how the theory of science actually works, how the process of science works. So when it comes to understanding how science works and what is going to come out of science, if that's what you're trying to understand, if you're trying to build a lab or university, or if you're, the founder of a country or the president of a country, and you're trying to build a scientific community within your country, there really isn't much of a theory in how to do this, because we don't really understand how science works. And to throw in David Deutsch's words, if you knew how it works, you would be able to program it. Or in other words, if you know how to program it, then you know how it works. And if you don't understand how to program it, then you just don't understand how it works. So now let's get back to wealth creation. And wealth creation as an investor is one of the purposes you can have as an investor. Let's be clear. You could have other purposes. The purpose of Orange Capital Partners is to generate wealth, but there are other investors with other purposes. And there's nothing wrong with that. If your purpose is to accumulate fees as a custodian of pension money, that's perfectly fine. But then you're in a different business than I am. And my podcast here and my hedge fund and all the things that I'm talking about, they don't pertain to the business of collecting fees. There is a business particularly practiced in New York and the city of London, which is pure and simple entertainment. It's entertainment in a sense that people go on TV, they talk about investment ideas, they inspire other people, and those people then give them money, or they even pay them to go on TV. I don't know how these people get paid, but they're paid for ideas. So they're storytellers. A lot of analysts are like that, even some hedge fund managers. I don't need to mention names here. This is not a name-calling type podcast. I just want to say, again, with all due respect, there are different types of purposes within the business of investing. The purpose of Orange Capital Partners is to generate wealth. So when I talk about things like, is there a theory of investing? Do we have theories? Do we have knowledge? Do we have explanatory knowledge that helps us within the business of investing? That's what I mean. Basically, do we have theories that help us generate wealth? And I don't think we do have. I think we don't. This is my conjecture. At Orange Capital Partners, we are trying to build a principal stack. Principal stacks are not theories. So what we have is a principal stack. This is a bunch of guidelines that help us navigate the financial markets. That's not a theory. A theory is a way to explain what's going on in a certain field. I said it in a few podcasts before. I said economics is a theory about competitive response. It's a theory. A theory is basically a thought process of how stuff works within a field. Within the field of economics, we look at how people react to competitive situations, particularly changes in the competitive landscape. Yes, it is also the theory of resource allocation. It is the theory of behavior and all that other stuff. But when the rubber meets the road is when competition kicks in. Otherwise, economics is not very useful. I'm not saying it's a bad theory or a good theory, any of that stuff. I'm just saying it's incredibly useful when you talk about situations where competitive response matters. It's not so useful when you start talking about things like resource allocation and all that stuff, because then it just becomes descriptive. When we have the theory, when we talk about economics in the context of competitive response, it starts having a lot of use for the business of wealth creation again. Like I said, it's not very useful, for example, when you're in the entertainment business. I think understanding narratives, for example, is much, much more useful than having a theory of competitive response. So what I'm alluding to here is already, I guess, that the theory of wealth creation is circling around the theory of competitive response. Competitive response is at the core of the theory of wealth creation. So having said that, let me say what the theory of wealth creation doesn't entail. For example, value investing had nothing to do with wealth creation. Now, maybe value investing 40, 50 years ago actually was a good way to generate wealth, because in those days, a lot of circumstances were different and the lingo of value investing wasn't developed, and therefore few people even knew how to think along those lines. So if somebody came up with, let's say, ideas such as you should buy, deep value stocks and stuff like that, then maybe that was very useful. I don't know. I don't have a good sense for that because I wasn't around back then. But I can tell you today, it's not very helpful in the wealth generation business. Again, very helpful in other businesses. For example, in the fee generation business, if you can convince pension fund managers that you're investing in so-called safe stocks because you're using value investing approaches, that's fine, but not in the wealth generation business. The wealth generation business is a different type of business. In my view, relies to a big extent on the theory of competitive response. So the core of explanatory knowledge around wealth creation is the theory of competitive response. Why? Again, because no matter how good your technologies are, no matter how good your business is, no matter how good your customer response, and whatever else you're measuring, the only way you can sustainably create returns. So in other words, the only way you can build an innovation stack, the only way you can actually keep compounding interest and knowledge and therefore create wealth, real wealth. So after everything, tax, inflation, all that, it's the only way is if competition cannot take that away from you. And the only way competition can't take that away from you is if you build an innovation stack. The only way you can build an innovation stack is if you fall within the context of the innovator's dilemma and if you follow the 0 to 1 approach. So these are all the kinds of things that we talked about in our principal stack. So I don't want to go there, but I just want to be very clear about one thing, that our principal stack is not a theory of wealth generation. It is a helpful tool, but it's not a theory. We're not there yet. We have certain, I think, aspects of theories. For example, we define disruption as a process where the cost of iteration comes down. So there is some of, you almost sense a certain mathematical ability to formulate pretty complex circumstances in business and put some mathematical variables on top of these things and then maybe explain things. That's true, and that's why it's so powerful, but it still doesn't make it a theory. I think a theory is really something like, for example, the theory of Newton and the motion and then quantum theory. Those are theories where where we have a little bit more meat around the bone. I don't want to fall into a Wittgensteinian trap here and start defining what is a theory and this and that. I just feel like sometimes there's more meat around the bone. I feel like, let's say, there's an incredibly strong theory of how people react in political markets by, I think, Jonathan Haidt and his Righteous Mind book. That's a very strong theory. I don't know if it's really a theory. I don't know if academics even accept this theory. I don't care. For me, it's a really good theory of how people act. Sort of the rider of the elephant being our frontal cortex, our conscious mind, our reason, all of that stuff is the rider of the elephant. The elephant is our emotional system, which is all the processing and thinking that we do that we don't consciously have control over. So that's a good theory in terms of how we respond to political markets and, by the way, also in financial markets. So let's get back to what do we have. So you're a graduate student in, let's say, a business school or something like that. What can we teach you so you can become a hedge fund manager? The answer is not much. Why? It's kind of like you're in an academy and you want to become a famous rock musician or something like that. You can become a rock musician. You can go to a university and become a physics person or a chemist or something like that. You can do that. But you're not going to be able to generate wealth. Either, the analogy would be, let's say, in physics, you can't generate a wealth of knowledge, or in chemistry, or in arts, you can't generate a wealth of an oeuvre which inspires other people. Actually, let's take this thought a bit further. So in art or in music, We talk about people that are successful and make something useful, people that have inspired other people. So actually, even in academics, that's kind of how it works, right? With all the citations and all that. So how does it work in investing? I guess you could use the same Google type approach here. You could say that a successful hedge fund is somebody that inspires other people to do what they do. Now, in the hedge fund world, that's a little bit easier to achieve because you don't even need to go market yourself. All you need is returns. Once you have returns, people will start copying you. You don't have to invite them to do that. So it's kind of like, in the end, the score takes care of itself. The score is what matters. And the score in the hedge fund business is returns. And of course, I'm assuming the returns are real and all that. And I don't want to go into those, conversations about how actually hedge funds report returns. Let's assume we have a transparent way to measure hedge funds, which we have in some ways, not always. Well, then we just look at the best returns and we say, okay, what are these people doing? And if there's a consistent thing that they're doing, then we go copy it. So that happens quite a lot, actually. But this is exactly why I think that the business of the hedge fund is kind of very similar to the art business, which is or science. In hindsight, we can all say, yeah, this guy was very good because he did this, this, and this. We can say that Giacometti was a great artist because in his development, he met Picasso, then he was trying to find a way to express the human body in a sculpture, and he was struggling, and then finally he did it. We can say the same thing about science. Max Planck was struggling with black body radiation, and next thing you know, we have quantum physics. But it's always in hindsight. We can't say that Max Planck walks into a laboratory and I believe that he will come up with a new theory because given this, this, and this will happen. We can't do that. So back to a graduate student in investing, I'm sorry, I can't give you that kind of theory. I can give you a history of investing, which is, value investing. I can go back to the Medici in Florence or the Babylonians or whatever. I can go back all the way if you want. The Romans, the Chinese, they all had some useful thing that they did which led to some useful result. But I just can't give you a lot of flesh around the bone when it comes to wealth generation. Now, we at Orange Capital Partners, again, we have made some attempts. I think we're on a pretty good path because we do have good results. And I'm very happy to share this. Excuse me. And of course, this is no investment advice. Just let's be very clear about our disclaimer. Go do your own work. I'm not suggesting you do what we do or anything like that. The purpose of this hedge fund is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And part of running a hedge fund is having a certain North Star, having a certain way of doing things. And our way of doing things is to have the principal stack. And within that principal stack, we have certain things which are pretty logical and mathematical. One is, again, cost of iteration. Let's look at the companies and let's see how can they lower their cost of iteration, their own cost of iteration, so they can keep trying faster and make faster mistakes and correct faster. So I would say if there's anything closely resembling a theory of wealth creation, it is going back to iteration. The faster you iterate, the faster you error correct, the better your system is. This goes back to even people like Nassim Taleb and his anti-fragility concept. Basically, a system where fast error correction is possible because the cost of making errors is low is an anti-fragile system. It does involve things like volatility, criticism, sometimes fighting, all these things, because you're continuously trying to elaborate what's wrong and how can you fix things, versus a situation where you believe that there's not much to fix, that everything is stable and everything is perfect. Those types of situations usually end up in what Nassim calls fragile situation. They collapse. And in our world, they just don't generate wealth. I spoke about this, let's say, within the context of Anki and Waymo and Google and many other companies that on paper should be very incredibly competitive, but they're not. And why? Because they're fragile. They're not in the error correcting business. They're in the trying to convince others that they're right business. We're looking for the error correcting. The error correcting business is the wealth generating business. Thank you.